The wind off the Bering Sea cut through my jacket as I stepped onto the dock, boots crunching on frostbitten planks. The fishing boat loomed ahead, its hull battered and streaked with salt, paint peeling in long strips like old skin. I'd answered the ad because the pay was too good to ignore, and I told myself the cold was just part of the job. But as I approached, I saw the crew clustered near the rail, their faces half hidden by hoods and beanies, eyes tracking me with a wariness that felt almost hostile. No one smiled. No one offered a hand. The captain stood apart, a thick-set man with a beard like steel wool and eyes that seemed to weigh every word before it left his mouth. "You're the new hand?" he asked, voice rough as gravel. I nodded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Yeah, my name's Tyler." He grunted, then jerked his head toward the gangway. "Get aboard. We leave with the tide." As I climbed onto the deck, one of the crew muttered something I couldn't catch. Another shot him a warning glare. I caught the tail end of a whisper, "Don't tell him yet." My stomach tightened. I'd worked rough jobs before, but this felt different. The air was thick with something unspoken. The captain led me to the wheelhouse, where a battered clipboard sat on the console. He tapped it with a gloved finger. "Before we go any further, you need to know the rules. You follow them, you get paid. You break them, you're on your own." His tone left no room for argument. I glanced at the list, scrawled in blocky handwriting. Some rules made sense: no drinking on duty, no fighting. Others were strange. Never fish after midnight. Never answer voices from the water. Always lock the hold at sunset. I looked up, questions on my tongue, but the captain's stare shut me down. "Last deckhand thought the rules were a joke," he said quietly. "He's not here anymore." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the slap of waves against the hull. I swallowed hard, suddenly unsure if I'd made a terrible mistake. The engine rumbled to life, and the boat eased away from the dock, leaving the lights of the tiny harbor behind. I stood on deck, hands shoved deep in my pockets, watching the shoreline shrink into a smear of gray against the endless water. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, untying lines, checking gear, but no one spoke to me. I felt like an intruder, a stranger in a place where everyone else already knew the script. Once we were clear of the harbor, the captain called everyone to the stern. The crew gathered in a loose semicircle, boots thudding on the wet deck. The captain's presence seemed to fill the space, his voice carrying easily over the wind and the slap of waves. "Listen up," he said, eyes sweeping over each of us before settling on me. "We've got a new hand, so we're going over the rules. All of them. No exceptions." He pulled a battered notebook from his coat and read aloud, his tone flat and final. "Rule 1. Never fish after midnight. I don't care if the nets are full or the catch is running hot. Midnight hits, lines come in. No arguments." One of the older crewmen, a wiry guy with a faded tattoo on his neck, nodded grimly. I tried to hide my confusion. What difference could an hour make? Rule 2. Never answer voices from the water. Doesn't matter if it sounds like your mother, your best friend, or someone screaming for help. You hear anything calling from the sea, you keep your mouth shut and your eyes forward. A shiver ran through the group. Someone crossed himself. I almost laughed, but the look on the captain's face killed the urge. Rule 3. Never go on deck alone, especially at night. Always take someone with you, even if it's just to check a line or take a leak. If you can't find anyone, you wait. The youngest crew member, barely out of his teens, glanced at the others, his jaw tight. Rule 4. Never bring anything found floating back on board. I don't care if it's a crate of whiskey, a life raft, or a bag of cash. If it's not ours, it stays in the water. The tattooed man spat over the rail, muttering something about bad luck. Rule 5. Always lock the hold at sunset. No matter what, once the sun's down, that door stays shut until morning. If you forget, you fix it fast. The captain closed the notebook and looked at each of us in turn. If you follow these rules, you'll make it home. You don't, you won't. I tried to keep my face neutral, but skepticism must have shown. The captain's eyes narrowed. You think this is some old sailor's superstition? I shrugged, not wanting to offend. Just seems a little much. The crew exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. The youngest finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. Last guy who laughed about the rules disappeared. Middle of the night. No one saw him go. The captain's voice was low, almost gentle. This sea doesn't forgive mistakes. The rules aren't for show. They're for survival. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and something colder, sharper. I looked at the faces around me, hard, weathered, and afraid. Whatever had happened out here, it had left scars deeper than any I could see. As the meeting broke up, I lingered, staring at the darkening horizon. The rules echoed in my mind, each one stranger than the last. I told myself I'd follow them, at least until I understood the reason. But a question gnawed at me. What happens if a rule is broken? And why did everyone look so scared? Night fell fast on the Bering Sea. One moment, the sky was a bruised purple. The next it was black as coal. The only light coming from the boat's deck lamps and the faint glow of the wheelhouse. The cold deepened, biting through my layers, and the wind carried a sharp, briny tang that stung my nose. I tried to focus on my tasks, coiling lines, checking the nets, making sure the gear was stowed, but my mind kept drifting back to the rules. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too far. Every creak of the hull sounded like a warning. My first shift started at 10. The captain assigned me to work with Pete, the tattooed veteran who'd barely spoken since we left port. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his eyes always scanning the water, the deck, the sky. I tried to make small talk, but he just grunted and handed me a pair of gloves. Keep your head down and your hands busy, he said. That's how you last out here. We worked in silence. The only sounds the slap of waves and the distant hum of the engine. Every so often, Pete would pause, listening intently, his face tightening. I tried not to let it get to me, but the tension was contagious. Around midnight, I was hauling in a line when I heard it, a faint voice drifting over the water. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. Help me. I froze, the rope slipping through my fingers. The voice was thin, desperate, and oddly familiar. It sounded like my sister, calling from somewhere just out of sight. I took a step toward the rail, heart pounding. Did you hear that? I asked Pete, my voice barely above a whisper. He was at my side in an instant, his grip iron-tight on my arm. "Don't," he hissed. "Don't answer. Don't even look." I tried to pull away, but he held me fast. "It's just someone," I started, but he cut me off with a glare. "It's not. Trust me. You answer and it'll never stop." The voice faded, replaced by a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. Pete didn't let go until the noise was gone, and even then, he kept his eyes on the water. "You almost broke Rule 2, he said quietly. "That's how it gets you. Makes you think it's someone you know. Someone you care about." I shivered, suddenly aware of how exposed we were, surrounded by endless black water. "What was it?" I asked, my voice shaking. Pete shook his head. "Doesn't matter. You don't want to know. Just remember the rules. They're the only thing between you and whatever's out there." We finished our shift in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Every time I glanced at the water, I half expected to see a face staring back or a hand reaching up from the depths. When my relief finally came, I stumbled below deck, my nerves frayed and my mind racing. Lying in my bunk, I replayed the night over and over. The voice, the grip of Pete's hand, the look in his eyes. He'd seen something out there, something that had left him scarred and silent. I wondered what it would take to break a man like that, and whether I'd survive long enough to find out. Sleep came slowly, haunted by dreams of voices in the dark and rules I barely understood. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, the memory of that desperate call still echoing in my ears. I told myself it was just the wind, just nerves, but deep down, I knew better. Out here, the rules weren't just superstition. They were a lifeline, and I'd almost let go. The storm rolled in without warning, a wall of black clouds swallowing the horizon. The wind howled, whipping icy spray across the deck, and the boat pitched and groaned as waves battered the hull. I clung to the rail, knuckles white, every muscle straining to keep my footing. The crew moved like shadows, faces grim, voices lost in the roar of the sea. The captain barked orders from the wheelhouse, his words snatched away by the wind. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos for a heartbeat. In that flash, I saw something bobbing in the water off the starboard side. A wooden crate, battered but intact, riding the swells like a message in a bottle. For a moment, I thought I was seeing things, but then another wave lifted it closer, and I could make out faded markings on the side. It looked old, maybe valuable. My mind raced. Salvage rights at sea meant anything found was fair game. Money, supplies, maybe even something that could make this miserable trip worthwhile. I glanced around. Pete was busy securing a loose net, the others preoccupied with keeping the boat afloat. The rule echoed in my mind: never bring anything found floating back on board. But it was just a crate. What harm could it do? I edged toward the rail, heart pounding, torn between curiosity and caution. Before I could decide, someone else acted. It was Mark, the youngest crew member, his face pale and eyes wide with fear and excitement. He grabbed a gaff and hooked the crate, dragging it closer. "Help me!" he shouted over the wind. I hesitated, the rule warring with the promise of reward. Another wave slammed the boat, nearly knocking us both off our feet. The crate thudded against the hull, and Mark leaned over, trying to haul it up. As he did, the lid splintered, and something spilled out, bundles of old, waterlogged clothing, tangled with what looked like fishing gear. For a second, relief washed over me. Just junk. But then I saw it. A hand, pale and bloated, slipping free from the mess. Mark recoiled, but it was too late. The hand latched onto his wrist, fingers digging in with impossible strength. He screamed, trying to pull away, but the grip only tightened. The rest of the crew rushed over, shouting, but no one dared touch the crate. The thing in the water began to climb, dragging itself up by Mark's arm. Its face was a nightmare, eyes black and empty, mouth twisted in a silent scream. Mark's cries turned to gurgles as the thing pulled him toward the rail, its other hand reaching for purchase. Pete grabbed an axe and swung, severing the thing's grip. Mark collapsed on the deck, gasping, his wrist ringed with livid bruises. The creature tumbled back into the sea, vanishing beneath the waves as quickly as it had appeared. For a long moment, no one moved. The storm raged around us, but the only sound was Mark's ragged breathing. The captain appeared, his face carved from stone. "I told you," he said, voice cold and hard. "Nothing from the water comes aboard. Nothing." He turned to me, eyes burning. "You remember that, or next time it'll be you." We dragged Mark below deck, his arm already swelling, the marks of the thing's fingers standing out like brands. No one spoke of what we'd seen, but the fear was palpable, a living thing that clung to every corner of the boat. I lay awake that night, listening to the storm and the creak of the hull, wondering what else drifted beneath the waves, waiting for someone to break the rules. Mark didn't speak much after the storm. He spent most of the next day in his bunk, shivering under a pile of blankets, his injured wrist wrapped in a dirty towel. The bruises had darkened, spreading up his arm in angry, branching patterns. When I brought him water, he barely looked at me, his eyes glassy and unfocused. I tried to ask if he was all right, but he just muttered something I couldn't make out, words lost in a feverish haze. The rest of the crew kept their distance. Pete watched Mark with a wary eye, and even the captain seemed unsettled, checking on him more than once but never staying long. The air on the boat was thick with tension. Every conversation cut short when Mark's name came up. No one wanted to talk about what had happened, but everyone felt the weight of it. By sunset, the captain called us all to the galley. He stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, jaw set. "From now on, the hold stays locked at all times after dark," he announced. "No one goes below alone. No one opens that door for any reason until sunrise." "Understood." We nodded, the seriousness in his voice leaving no room for argument. "We're on high alert. If you see or hear anything strange, you come to me or Pete. Don't try to handle it yourself." After dinner, I found Mark standing at the stern, staring out at the endless black water. The wind whipped his hair around his face, but he didn't seem to notice. I called his name, but he didn't respond. He just kept whispering, his lips moving in a silent conversation with the sea. I stepped closer, catching fragments of his words, something about voices, about cold hands and promises made in the dark. Pete appeared beside me, his face grim. "He's not coming back from this," he said quietly. "The sea's got its hooks in him now." I wanted to argue, to say that Mark just needed rest, but the look in Pete's eyes stopped me. He'd seen this before. That night I couldn't sleep, Every creak of the boat, every gust of wind, set my nerves on edge. I lay in my bunk, listening to the sounds of the sea, the distant groan of the hull, the soft, rhythmic thud of footsteps above. At first, I thought it was just someone on watch, but the steps didn't follow any pattern. They wandered back and forth, pausing at the doors, the hatches, the rail. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed and crept up the narrow stairs, careful not to wake the others. The deck was empty, the lamps casting long, wavering shadows. I found Mark at the bow, barefoot and shivering, his eyes fixed on the water. He was talking again, his voice low and urgent, as if pleading with someone just out of sight. I watched, heart pounding, as he climbed onto the rail, balancing precariously above the churning sea. "Mark," I hissed, but he didn't hear me. He leaned forward, arms outstretched, as if reaching for something only he could see. The water below seemed to pulse, dark shapes swirling just beneath the surface. Suddenly, a voice rose from the waves, not Mark's, but something older, deeper, echoing with a cold, inhuman hunger. "Come home," it called, the words slithering across the deck like oil. Mark's body went rigid, his head snapping back, eyes wide and unseeing. He let out a strangled cry, then toppled forward, vanishing into the blackness below. I rushed to the rail, searching the water for any sign of him. But there was nothing, no splash, no struggle, just the endless, hungry sea. The voice faded, replaced by the familiar sound of waves and wind. I stood there, shaking. The reality of what I'd witnessed settled over me like a shroud. Pete found me a few minutes later, his face pale. "He's gone, isn't he?" I nodded, unable to speak. He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip steady. "The sea takes what it wants. That's why we have the rules." We went back below, locking the hold behind us. The rest of the crew was already awake, drawn by the commotion. The captain listened to my account in silence, then nodded once, his expression unreadable. "We do what we can," he said, "but sometimes it's not enough." I lay awake until dawn, haunted by the memory of Mark's final moments. The rules had protected us, but only up to a point. The sea was older, stronger, and far more patient than any of us. I wondered how many others had been lost to its call, how many more would follow. The only thing I knew for certain was that I would never doubt the rules again. The morning after Mark vanished, the mood on the boat was grim. No one spoke at breakfast, and even the usual clatter of dishes seemed muffled by the weight of what had happened. I found myself glancing at the empty seat where Mark should have been, half expecting him to stumble in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. But the sea doesn't give back what it takes. After the meal, the captain motioned for me to follow him to the wheelhouse. The door closed behind us with a heavy thud, shutting out the world. He stood by the window, staring out at the endless gray water, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long time, he said nothing. I waited, unsure if I should speak. Finally, he broke the silence. "You want to know why I have these rules?" It wasn't a question. He turned, and for the first time, I saw the exhaustion etched deep into his face, the lines carved by years of wind, salt, and something harder. I wasn't always this strict, used to think the sea was just water and weather like any other man. but I learned something different. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a jagged scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow, the skin puckered and pale. The first time I broke a rule, I was young. I thought I could outsmart the ocean. We found a lifeboat drifting after a storm. No one aboard but a crate of supplies. Brought it on deck. That night, half my crew vanished. No sign, no struggle. Just gone. He paused, his gaze distant. I lost my brother that way. He was my first mate. We grew up together, learned to fish these waters side by side. He heard a voice one night, our mother's, calling from the dark. He answered. I found his boots by the rail in the morning, nothing else. The captain's voice grew rough, thick with old grief. My wife sailed with me once years ago. She was the one who started the tradition of locking the hold at sunset. Said it kept the darkness out. I didn't listen, not at first. One night I forgot. She was gone by dawn. I never found her. He looked at me, eyes hard as flint. You think I like these rules? I hate them, but I hate losing people more. Every rule is written in blood. Mine, my family's, my crew's. The sea remembers every mistake. It never forgives. A heavy silence settled between us. I saw now that the captain wasn't just a hard man. He was a haunted one, carrying the weight of every loss, every failure. I understood at that moment that the rules weren't just superstition. They were the only thing standing between us and the same fate. And I wondered, with a chill, what else the captain had lost to the sea, and what secrets he still kept locked away. The storm hit just after midnight, a sudden fury that turned the sea into a living thing. Rain hammered the deck, and the wind howled so loud it drowned out every other sound. The boat pitched and rolled, each wave slamming against the hull with bone-rattling force. I was on watch with Pete, both of us soaked to the skin, clinging to the rail as we checked the lines. The captain was in the wheelhouse, fighting the controls, his face lit by the sickly green glow of the instruments. Then, with a shudder that ran through the whole boat, the engine died. The lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness broken only by the erratic flash of lightning. The sudden silence was terrifying, the absence of the engine's steady thrum making the storm seem even more alive. Pete cursed, his voice barely audible over the wind. We need to get below, check the generator. Before I could answer, a massive wave crashed over the bow, sweeping Pete off his feet. I lunged for him, but he was already sliding across the slick deck, arms flailing. He hit the rail hard, and for a moment, I thought he'd catch himself. Then another wave struck, and he was gone, torn from the boat and swallowed by the black, churning sea. I froze, heart pounding, staring at the spot where he'd vanished. The rules screamed in my mind. Never go on deck alone. Never answer voices from the water. But Pete was out there, somewhere in the dark, fighting for his life. Instinct warred with everything I'd learned since coming aboard. I couldn't just leave him, not after everything we'd been through. Then I heard it, a voice rising above the storm, calling my name. Tyler, help me. It was Pete, or at least it sounded like him. Desperate, terrified, so real I could almost see his face. I stumbled toward the rail, peering into the darkness, searching for any sign of him. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw a hand reaching up from the water, fingers grasping at empty air. "Tyler, please." The voice was closer now, echoing across the waves. I grabbed a life ring, ready to throw it, but something stopped me. The memory of Mark, of the thing that had grabbed him, of the captain's stories and the rules written in blood. Was it really Pete out there, or something else wearing his voice? The wind shifted, carrying more voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, all calling my name, all begging for help. Some were familiar, others strange, but each one twisted with the same note of hunger. I felt myself slipping, the line between compassion and survival blurring in the chaos. I looked back at the wheelhouse, saw the captain's silhouette framed in the window, his face a mask of fear and fury. He pounded on the glass, shouting something I couldn't hear, but I knew what he was saying. Don't break the rules. Don't let them in. Tears stung my eyes as I clung to the rail, torn between the urge to save a friend and the knowledge that doing so might doom us all. Another flash of lightning, and the hand was gone. The voices faded, replaced by the relentless roar of the storm. I staggered back from the rail, dropping the life ring, my whole body shaking. I wanted to scream, to curse the sea and its endless cruelty, but all I could do was collapse against the cold, wet deck, sobbing with relief and guilt. I hadn't broken the rule. I hadn't answered the call, but I'd left Pete to the mercy of the water, and I didn't know if I could live with that choice. The engine sputtered back to life, the lights flickering on as the captain wrestled control from the storm. He found me on the deck, soaked and shivering, and helped me to my feet. He didn't say a word, just squeezed my shoulder and led me below. That night, I lay in my bunk, haunted by the sound of Pete's voice and the memory of all those hands reaching from the deep. I understood now, in a way I never had before, why the rules existed. They weren't just about survival, they were about sacrifice, about choosing who you could save and who you had to let go. The sea demanded a price, and sometimes the only way to pay it was to turn away from everything that made you human. The storm that followed was unlike anything I'd ever imagined. The sky vanished behind a wall of black clouds, and the sea rose up in mountains, tossing the boat like a toy. Rain hammered the deck in sheets, and the wind screamed, tearing at every loose line and rattling the doors in their frames. The air was so cold it burned my lungs, and every breath tasted of salt and fear. The captain and I were the only ones left on deck. The others, those who hadn't vanished or been claimed by the sea, were huddled below, praying or weeping or simply staring into the dark. The captain's face was set, jaw clenched, eyes wild with a mix of terror and determination. He barked orders, and I obeyed without question, my mind numb with exhaustion and dread. "Lock the hold," he shouted, voice barely audible over the storm. I stumbled across the pitching deck, nearly losing my footing as a wave crashed over the rail. The hold's heavy door loomed ahead, swinging open and shut with every lurch of the boat. I grabbed the handle, fighting the wind, and slammed it shut, twisting the lock until it clicked. For a moment, I pressed my forehead against the cold metal, listening to the chaos outside and the strange, muffled sounds coming from within. Something scratched at the other side of the door, slow and deliberate, as if testing the strength of the lock. I forced myself away, heart pounding, and rejoined the captain at the wheelhouse. The windows were streaked with rain, but I could see shapes moving in the water, pale, shifting forms that rose and fell with the waves. their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They circled the boat, drawing closer with every pass, their voices rising above the wind. Tyler. The voices were everywhere, inside my head and out, whispering promises and threats, pleading and mocking. Some sounded like Pete, others like Mark, and some like people I hadn't thought of in years. Let us in. Help us. It's so cold. We're so hungry. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The captain grabbed my arm, shaking me hard. Don't listen. Don't answer. They'll do anything to get you to break the rules. His grip was bruising, but it anchored me, kept me from slipping into the madness that waited just beyond the edge of reason. The boat shuddered as something massive struck the hull. The lights flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness. The only illumination came from the lightning, each flash revealing more of the things in the water. Dozens, maybe hundreds, their faces twisted and inhuman, mouths open in silent screams. The captain shoved a flare into my hand. We have to keep them back. If they get on board, it's over. I fumbled with the cap, my fingers numb and clumsy, but managed to strike the flare. Red light bloomed, casting everything in a hellish glow. The creatures shrank from it, hissing and writhing, but they didn't retreat. They just circled, waiting. A sudden crash from below deck made us both jump. The whole door rattled violently, something pounding from the inside. I remembered the scratching, the sense that something had been waiting for a moment of weakness. The captain's face went pale. They're inside. Someone must have left it open before you locked it. We raced below, the boat pitching so hard I nearly fell down the stairs. The whole door bulged inward, the metal groaning under the assault. The captain pressed his back against it, bracing it with his body. "Get the chain," he shouted. I found the heavy chain in the emergency locker and wrapped it around the handle, securing it as tightly as I could. The pounding continued, relentless, but the door held. Suddenly, a voice rose from the other side, soft and pleading. "Please, Tyler, let me out. It's so dark here. I'm scared." It was my mother's voice, perfect in every detail. I froze, tears stinging my eyes. The captain saw my hesitation and slapped me hard. "It's not her. It's never them. Don't you get it? That's how they win." I nodded, choking back a sob, and turned away from the door. The pounding faded, replaced by a low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. We stumbled back up to the deck, the storm still raging, the creatures still circling. The captain fired off another flare, the red light pushing the things back for a moment. But then one of them lunged, its arms stretching impossibly long, fingers like hooks. It caught the captain's leg, dragging him toward the rail. He screamed, kicking and clawing, but the thing was too strong. Without thinking, I grabbed a fire axe from the wall and swung, severing the creature's grip. The captain collapsed, gasping, his leg bleeding badly. I dragged him away from the rail. The two of us huddled together as the storm reached its peak. The night seemed endless, a blur of terror and pain and desperate survival. The rules were all that kept us alive, locking the hold, resisting the voices, never going on deck alone. But even the rules had limits. The sea was relentless, its hunger insatiable. As dawn finally broke, the storm faded, the creatures slipping back into the depths. The boat was battered, the crew decimated, but the captain and I were still alive. Barely. We looked at each other, understanding passing between us without a word. We had survived, but at a terrible cost. The sea had taken its due, and we had paid in blood, fear, and the loss of everything that made us feel safe. I wondered, as the sun rose over the ruined deck, if survival was enough, or if the true cost was something we'd carry forever. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the battered deck in pale gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt unnatural. I moved through the wreckage, numb and exhausted, checking for survivors. Only the captain and I remained. The others were gone, claimed by the sea, by the things that waited in the dark, or by their own mistakes. We didn't speak as we set the battered boat on a course for home, the engine coughing and sputtering but holding together just enough. As the coastline came into view, I found myself replaying every moment, every rule, every choice. The rules had saved us, but they'd also demanded a price. I thought of Mark, Pete, and the others, of the voices that still echoed in my mind. I wondered if I'd ever sleep soundly again, or if I'd always hear the sea calling, promising things I knew better than to believe. The captain sat at the wheel, his face drawn and haunted, eyes fixed on the water ahead. I understood him now in a way I hadn't before. The rules weren't just superstition. They were scars, reminders of every loss, every failure, every night survived by the narrowest margin. Out here, the line between life and death was as thin as a strand of fishing line, and just as easy to snap. We limped into port as the sun climbed higher, the familiar shapes of the dock and the waiting town a welcome sight. As we tied off, I saw a young man standing on the dock, duffel bag at his feet, eyes bright with hope and ignorance. The captain met my gaze, and for a moment, I saw the weight of all the years, all the warnings he'd given and all the ones ignored. I wanted to shout a warning, to tell the new hand to run, but the words stuck in my throat. He would learn just as I had, just as all the others had before us. The sea was patient, the rules were clear, but not everyone listened, and not everyone survived. As I stepped onto solid ground, I wondered how long it would be before the cycle began again, and who the sea would claim next.